can pin her and everybody can see her. Ulrike, can you say hello if you are there? Because I
Hi,
might be able to find you
yes.
this
Good
way.
morning,
Oh,
everyone.
here
Good
you are.
afternoon, probably, to
Yeah.
everybody.
Actually, Ulrike, everybody is all over the world. So we have people in the middle of
Okay.
the night. We have people in Japan. We have people in Asia, everywhere. I'm going to pin you so
Okay.
everybody can see you. Hello, Ulrike. Just give me 1 second and I'm going to transition to your bio and describing the amazing work that you do. And then we can start right away with your presentation. Here we go. So it's really a great pleasure for me to have Ulrike here. It's been serendipitous to meet her. We met because Ulrike asked me for a paper, and then I saw her profile on LinkedIn, and then I looked for her online. I said, "Wow, this is amazing. We should invite Ulrike to give a talk to our students," and that's how a friendship was born. And this is also the first time that we actually speak in person, so I'm very happy to have you here, Ulrike. Welcome. A little bit about Ulrike, her bio. Dr. Ulrike Krauss is the program manager for the climate change program, EbA Facility. Ulrike is a German-Saint Lucian dual national with over 25 years of experience in natural resource management. Since 2014, much of her efforts are focused on climate change adaptation in the Insular Caribbean. Her past experiences include integrated pest management and agroforestry projects in South and Central America, invasive species in the Insular Caribbean, as well as integrated watershed and land management and Multilateral Environmental Agreement, reporting in Saint Lucia. Today, Ulrike will give a talk titled Caribbean Conservation in Action, Exploring the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund and International Careers in Environmental Stewardship. It's really very special and thoughtful that Ulrike decided to incorporate a little bit of professional development for you in her talk, and I'm very grateful for the time that she took preparing these slides. They're wonderful, and I think you're going to be energized. Thank you very much for being here, Ulrike.
Thank you, Marta, for this wonderful introduction. And yeah, hello to everybody all over the world. I hope you're not too tired from the previous speaker. So my presentation really will be quite interactive. I will start with explaining a little bit about the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund, CBF, the organization I'm working for, have a short question-answer session on that part, and then I will go into how to start a career in international conservation, a couple of hints and so forth, with hopefully, if time permits, a longer question-answer session at the end. So the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund is an umbrella environmental fund with a flexible structure to implement innovative solutions for conservation and resource mobilization in the Caribbean. We have a range of financial instruments, and unfortunately, I cannot read my entire slide as long as I see the, just see if I can fold this down, yes. So we are currently managing almost 180 million US dollars. And the CBF collaborates closely with national conservation trust funds on the Caribbean islands, and together we form the Caribbean Sustainable Finance Architecture, which I will explain to you. So we have 3 programs. The oldest is the Conservation Finance Program. It is over 10 years old now, and that is rooted in an endowment fund. Basically, that means a large amount of money is invested by professional asset managers, and you only harvest from the revenue that comes out of the investment. So the endowment fund is over 80 million. Plus, we have a couple of projects, which I will give you a quick overview only of about 20 million. The market value, given the investments we are doing, is now over 100 million. And it has leveraged 4.8 million so far in project money or in additional funding. Then we have the climate change program, which is where I am seated, and I will talk about the ecosystem-based adaptation, which is a sinking fund, which means we were given money from the German government through KfW, the German Development Bank, to spend down on it. We had initially a total of 60 million. We are spending down on it, so it is now around 40 million, and we have leveraged 5.5 in co-finance. And then we have the nature-based economies program, which has very similar structure, circular economy facility, also sinking fund. It is very new. It only started in 2022. So the amount is small at this stage. And for the two sinking funds, we have 9 eligible countries. The eligibility changes every so often. So I started off with the development assistant in the Insular Caribbean, and that is a list that the Organization of Economic Cooperation. If a country wants assistance with setting up a national conservation trust fund, they apply standards and fulfill the requirements. So we are less restricted by the donors. Funding for the protection and management of biodiversity and natural resources. The funds are invested in country-based sub-accounts.
I think there might be some delays with the connection.
Okay, yes, it is a little shaky. Can
mm,
you see the slide?
We can see the slides very well. It's just the audio that sometimes stops for a second and then it catches up, and then it stops for a second and then it catches up.
Okay.
If it becomes
I
too difficult, there is a possible solution, which is you already sent me your slides. I can upload the slides on my side and I can move the slides so you don't have to share video as well. Or you can take off your video if you prefer, and have just the voice if you think that would help.
Well, let's try. Then we have the slides uploaded at your end and you just interrupt me. Is
Okay,
that okay?
Yes, you can continue for a second until I find the slides and then I'm
Yeah.
going to upload them.
Yeah, I sent an update this morning, so
Yeah.
this is slightly modified.
Yes, I'm
Yeah,
downloading.
so basically we have sub-accounts where we know how much every country has. And as the NCTFs get established with our help, the international standards that have to be followed, set up a governance structure, a financial structure, administration, etc.
Okay.
So yes.
Yeah.
So as they move, no one back, please.
Yeah. Yeah.
No. So as those NCTFs gradually get established, they get the revenue from the investment and can start making grants at the national level according to national priorities, their own defined priorities. The conservation finance program is also complemented by specific projects, and it is a progressive mechanism. So as we help them build up their governance and financial structure, we also ask them to start fundraising. So they have to go to the private sector, to government offices, to international donors, and start bringing on their own funding. Our contribution remains constant. It is 4% of the revenue of the sub-account if they fulfill the requirements, reporting, etc. But gradually, from the third payment onwards, they have to bring in some own funding, 25%, then the fourth payment 50, fifth payment 75, and by the time we give them the sixth payment, they have to have matching funds. So we really help them to build up strong institutions that are self-sustaining to some extent in fundraising and pursuing their own conservation priorities in country. Next slide, please. So the projects under conservation finance, there are many. I will only mention really in detail the Caribbean Organization for Resilient Environment, or CORE, funded by Global Affairs Canada, because that aims to mainstream EBA through the NCTFs with a gender lens. So it connects the two programs, the climate change program that I had with the conservation finance program, and we can help the NCTFs to grow into EBA projects. There are a couple of other interesting projects that I listed here. I'm sure you can get the PDF version of this presentation and also check them out on our website if you're interested. Next slide, please. So what is ecosystem-based adaptation? I don't know if you had that in your lectures in the university, but it is the use of biodiversity and ecosystem services as part of an overall adaptation strategy to help people to adapt to the adverse effect of climate change. So there are three components here, and they're all equally important. There is the biodiversity conservation component, the climate change adaptation component, and the socioeconomic benefits livelihood component. They all have to be present for it to be called EBA. And EBA is a subset of nature-based solution, specifically that looks at climate change adaptation. Next slide, please. So our EBA facility is funded by the German government, as I mentioned, under the International Climate Initiative, and it has the strategic objective to sustainably manage EBA supporting marine and coastal zone habitats, including rehabilitating and key biodiversity ecosystems and incorporating social and economic resilience to climate change, all in the Caribbean, in the Insular Caribbean. Next one, please. So this gives you a pictorial overview of what we do. Basically, adaptation starts underwater with coral reefs, especially some of the Agroforestry species are very good at breaking the strong waves. Behind that, there's already a livelihood component, sustainable fisheries, sea moss farming. Sea moss is a type of algae that in the Caribbean is used for drinks, but also for cosmetics, and it has a substance similar to alginate that can be extracted. And then as we move on land, we have sand dune, we have coastal stabilization using hybrid or green infrastructure, mangroves, for example. And behind it, you can practice agriculture, agroforestry, beekeeping, etc. And we're particularly interested in value added. So we had some vetiver stabilization, and that vetiver grass is used to weave baskets and placemats, but also to extract essential oils. Ecotourism is very important in the Caribbean, etc. Next slide, please. We have 34 projects in total. 18 are active, 16 have already been completed. We work in 11 countries. You've only seen 9 on the earlier slide if you paid attention, but I said that list changed over time. So we had 9 primary beneficiary countries, and we were allowed to work in additional countries that were weaned off the overseas development list for some time. We are no longer allowed to do so, but that's why we have 11 countries when only 9 are eligible now. We are quite flexible in terms of institutional eligibility. For the first 4 calls for proposals, it could be government organizations, NGOs, private sector, international academic institutions. For the 5th call for proposal, governments have been removed. 4 calls of proposals have been completed. They're still implementing, but the call as such has been completed, and we have committed $45.5 million to those projects, of which we have disbursed 28 million. The 5th call for proposal is currently being evaluated at the concept note stage. So this is a 2-stage process. Next slide, please. So here you can see the countries again, the 9 primary beneficiary countries. And if you look carefully, it's only 8. That is because Montserrat doesn't have a project. It's eligible, but it's a tiny UK dependency in the Caribbean, and they have not had a quality submission that we could fund. And part of the islands that were weaned off support, we had regional projects that included activities in Antigua and Barbuda, in Barbados, and in Trinidad and Tobago, but we are no longer allowed to fund them there under the 5th call for proposal. Next slide, please. So how do these conservation projects restore or increase resilience? Basically, we are restoring coastal marine ecosystems, mangroves, coral reefs, seagrass beds, salt marshes, coastal forests as part of the broader adaptation strategy. I'd always think about the livelihood, sustainable fisheries. I mentioned CMOS farming, ecotourism, agroforestry, beekeeping, etc. Next one. We did a survey with our grantees across the first 4 calls for proposals, and it turned out that mangroves and coral reefs were by far the most important ecosystems to them in the EbA projects, but also ridge to reef, which looks at complete watersheds. And then the other ecosystems were in there, but not as important as mangroves and coral reefs, which is why we focus a lot of capacity building on these ecosystems. Next slide, please. Which climate threats are we addressing? Again, this comes out of a survey, and the main threat is really storms, both in terms of wind damage on land, but also storm surges coming from the sea. Very high on the list was overexploitation of natural resources, which is not strictly a climate threat, but is closely linked to climate threats and made worse. So we decided to include it because the human-made aggravation is very important in our projects. Long-term sea level rise, which is different from the storm surges, precipitation extremes, which includes flooding and droughts, high sea temperatures, and I should say that survey was just done early 2023, so before we had those serious El Nino effects with the very high sea temperatures in the Caribbean. Excessive land temperatures.
Sorry, there was it froze for a second.
Yes, I do get warnings here that the internet connection is unstable, but that's the Caribbean for you. Ocean acidification and invasive species, which I'm sure are underestimated. Next slide, please. So the impacts that we are mitigating, which is different from the threats that we are addressing, the most frequently mentioned was habitat degradation and loss, followed by a tie for second place, coastal flooding and coastal erosion. There are other forms of land degradation which were also raised, for instance, soil fertility loss, etc. Infrastructure on small Caribbean islands, very often you find that towns, airports, and other crucial infrastructure is very much close to the coast. Sedimentation and turbidity severely affect coral reefs. Coral diseases and bleaching, if I would do the survey now, would be much higher because bleaching is extreme in the Caribbean. Eutrophication, saltwater intrusion and salination, in particular in Haiti and in other low-lying areas, that is a big problem. And then a mix of others across the call. Next slide, please. Okay, our 5th call for proposal was launched in October last year, and we gave a webinar to clarify what we expect and gave some hints and tips. The submission deadline for concept notes was in December. We got 73 submissions. There are quite a few duplications in there, and we are currently closing the compliance check, and then we see how many of those move to the detailed assessment by a selection committee. That committee will shortlist the best concept notes, and we will invite them to prepare full proposal. At that stage, we will also offer them a project preparation grant of up to $10,000, so they can hire a consultant, do some baseline work, consult with stakeholders, etc. And we're looking for 6 to 8, maximum 10 projects, depending on the quality of submissions and the amount of money requested, because we have no more than 15 million US dollars available for this call. Once we award the grants, we will hold an inception workshop to give everybody an idea what we expect in terms of planning documentation, mission, site visits, reporting, etc. And yeah, how the whole implementation will be supervised. Next slide, please. In 2024, we had a couple of highlights. I mentioned we had 34 projects in total. 9 have been closed out successfully, basically most of the first cohort of grantees and some of the second. We had some very relevant impacts, which are ICI impact indicators, 12,000 hectares of ecosystem improved or protected. Over 22,000 people are directly benefiting. There are also indirect beneficiaries. Out of those direct beneficiaries, 44% are female. We have almost 5,000, by now it is actually over 5,000 people who have reported enhanced livelihood opportunities. And in terms of greenhouse gas emissions reduced or sequestered, we're underreporting. Those 280,000 tons basically comes from 2 grantees who have the technical capacity to report, and we're ignoring all the others, which is why we launched a consultancy that helps grantees to quantify the carbon, which is ongoing right now, so that number should go up very quickly. We have enhanced the peer-to-peer knowledge exchange. A lot of lessons have been learned. So we really want our more experienced grantees to help the less experienced ones to wean them off the support from the CBF as a strategy for long-term sustainability. For that reason, we have set up the Caribbean Coral Health Forum, which is basically a virtual platform where coral health practitioners and other interested parties can exchange and find solutions, share knowledge, discuss. We have a newsletter, sort of a passive broadcast, and we also have a WhatsApp group where people can actively interact. And at the climate change, no, not the climate change, the biodiversity COP, we had a side event on coral health in the Caribbean, strategies for climate resilience. Next slide, please. Yes, and our final program under nature-based economies focuses on circular economy. So I wanted to mention that that is the newest of our programs, and it focuses on reducing marine pollution in the Caribbean through the promotion of sustainable circular economy. They have 28 million available, and the first call for proposal has closed. It is currently undergoing the second stage evaluation of full proposals, and the second call is planned sometimes probably later this year, if not early next year. Next slide, please. So the ACE facility has 3 main objectives: the prevention of marine litter, the removal of where it is already there, and knowledge and data support. So yeah, generate the information on circular economy in the Caribbean region, but also distribute it and share it for general use. Next one, please. Okay, so that was the first half on the CBF. Are there any questions so far?
While we wait for questions from students, I'm going to ask a question. If you could share some insights about, I'm going to go back one slide, about what type of data is helpful or is provided to the different countries about circular economy, and what are you observing? And I actually have an additional question. If you have any comment about the outlook or implications for the Caribbean post COP16. So any impression, any thought that you may want to share with us?
I'm glad you're not asking me about COP29, because that was much more frustrating. But yeah, the global biodiversity framework, I think, is going in the right direction. I'm a little disappointed that for the past, I think it's at least 15 or 16 years, the Rio Conventions have been talking to each other that they should collaborate more closely, and they keep talking instead of really collaborating more closely. And only large organizations can attend all three of them because it is really one after the other after the other. And with all the preparation that goes into it, we only attended the climate COP twice. And yeah, it was basically me single-handed, and it is just too much. So I think I will do it one more time and not again. In terms of information that we provide, yeah, we are, of course, trying to get credible reports from the different Caribbean countries on volumes, tonnage, etc. We did a survey where some recycling activities exist. Many Caribbean islands are below critical mass. But then, yeah, you have the tiny Dutch dependency of Sabre, where the Dutch government built a big recycling factory, which the larger independent countries like Saint Lucia, larger with 180,000 inhabitants total country, cannot afford out of the yeah, taxpayers' money, and probably couldn't operate even if donor paid for it. So yeah, that is information that the ACE facility is working on. Both facilities, I should mention, have a technical supervisory committee, the EBA or the ACE committee, and they're all experts in the field. So those people contribute a lot of knowledge and exchange it. They have quarterly meetings, and then we can organize workshops. And at least for EBA, we can have workshops on coral and mangrove restoration with our grantees. The ACE facility is in the process of selecting the first cohort of grantees. So there is no flow of information to grantees yet, but that will come, of course, as soon as grant agreements are signed and they set up an inception workshop.
Thank you. There is a question in the chat from Alok. To what extent does the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund work with on territories in the Caribbean that do not have full sovereignty? So for example, overseas territories, and what are the challenges, political or otherwise, that you face in involving them?
Okay. Our programs cannot directly support the overseas territories of any of the any of the overseas territories, with the exception of Montserrat, which is on the ODA list, but we do collaborate quite closely. I'm not sure if on the list of projects you have seen a French funded project. And the French, of course, are present in Martinique, Guadeloupe, Saint Barth, Saint Martin. So we do collaborate with them. We've invited to go to a congress on urban nature-based solutions in Guadeloupe. Unfortunately, nobody could go. We were invited to a congress on sargasso management in the entire Caribbean, which we did attend. One of our technical officers for the Bluefin Blue Economy Finance Project, he is actually from St. Martin, from the Dutch part of St. Martin. So he used to direct the Dutch Caribbean Nature Alliance. So again, we have very close ties to them and can collaborate, but we cannot fund them directly.
Thank you. Any other questions? Maybe we can continue to the second part of the talk and then open up for larger question and answers.
Okay, so and observations on starting a career in international conservation. I see my internet is shaking again. But you also need something that sets you apart from the competition. So that's what we want. What your passion is. Unless you're passionate about what you you should look you're passionate about something, make an effort. Very rarely opportunities fall into your lap. Sometimes they do, but it's the exception. So be proactive in exploring opportunities, reach out to your top choice opportunities, expand your skills and qualifications free of charge if you're between university courses. I mean, you're doing this now with the Winter University. One I find particularly useful is the United Nations e-learning courses because they have a wide range of skills in many relevant disciplines. Network, and for that it is very useful to set up and maintain a LinkedIn profile and volunteer. There are lots of websites where you can find opportunities, volunteering opportunities. Some of them are to see where the opportunities are, and then you go and internships. There tend to be every so often funded opportunities or other opportunities to get funding. So just one example, the young lady you see there on the LinkedIn profile, that is not randomly chosen. She wrote to me at a time when I was preparing for COP27 in Egypt, and we got dozens of activists writing to us, many dozens of requests for accreditation badges, for funding to go to COP27 with us. Her application was different. She said, I'm studying something that requires me to go to one of the big international conferences, and COP would really be my goal. I will find a way to get there, to get a badge and to get the funding. But I like what the CBF is doing. She had some specific examples and said, what can I do for you when I'm there? How can I collaborate with you? And that immediately caught my attention. So she found her own way there. We met, and we quickly figured out that conservation finance was the better match than climate change. And then she did an internship with the conservation finance program, which helped her. That was virtual, and it was a not funded internship, just a short little desk job. But that was an entry level to get a funded internship in Indonesia and to get at least travel grant. And now she is a paid fellow. So that's how it can go if you make an effort and set yourself apart. Next slide, please. Yeah, I mentioned internships and volunteering. And this is one opportunity we have at the CBF right now, but only for students who are either nationals or matriculated at CARIFORUM or French Caribbean University. So yeah, that also answers one of the previous questions on the French or overseas connection, because the French are funding those universities qualify. For those opportunities, it helps to have language skills. So if you have the opportunity to learn another language, if you're interested to work in a particular country, learn those languages. If you like marine biology, get dive certification. If you want to work in a relatively hazardous environment, get first aid information. We once organized a course working in environments with a high snake risk, which was very useful, where we were working in snake-infested cocoa plantations. Get teaching experience if you want to do some kind of